On the morning of January 28th, 2017, 20-year-old Elaine Park vanished without a trace. Hours earlier, she had been at her ex-boyfriend's home in Calabasas, California, where security cameras captured her walking to her car and driving away just after dawn. 5 days later, Elaine's charcoal gray Honda Civic was discovered abandoned along the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. The doors were unlocked, the battery was dead with the lights left on, and her personal belongings were still inside, and Elaine herself was nowhere to be found. In the years since that day, her case has become a haunting mystery, leaving family, friends, and investigators desperate for answers. Elaine Park was the only child of a Korean-American family, and she was known for her upbeat personality and love of the arts and acting. In high school, Elaine had been a cheerleader and performer in musical theater, and she aspired to an entertainment career. She even landed small roles as an extra on popular TV shows, including Desperate Housewives and Mad TV. In 2017, Elaine was living with her mother, Susan Park, while attending a local college. She had recently taken a break from school and was going through a rough patch. She'd dropped out of some courses and lost a restaurant job, which had been discouraging. Elaine also struggled at times with depression, but those close to her say she always kept in touch, and her disappearance was completely out of character. At the time of her disappearance, Elaine was in an on-and-off relationship with Divine Compeer, known as Div, the son of a prominent Hollywood businessman. Divine's father is the co-owner of a film production company, and he lived with his family in a gated hillside home in Calabasas. Elaine and Div had been dating casually, and although they'd broken up before, they continued spending time together. On the night of January 27th, 2017, Elaine made plans to hang out with Divine, not knowing it would be the last night anyone would see her. That evening, the young couple went to see a late movie at a theater in Woodland Hills. According to security footage and later interviews, they took an Uber to the movie around 10:20 p.m. and returned to Div's family home shortly after 1 a.m. The rideshare driver noted nothing unusual. Elaine and Divine seemed to be in good spirits and enjoyed their night out. What happened in the early morning hours of January 28th remains one of the most puzzling pieces of this case. Div told police that around 4 that morning, Elaine suddenly woke up, shaking and singing, appearing to suffer a panic attack for unknown reasons. He said he tried to comfort her and suggested she stay, but Elaine was restless and decided to leave. By about 6:05 a.m., Elaine had gotten dressed, walked out to her car, as captured on a home surveillance camera, and drove away from the residence. The gated community's security system recorded her Honda Civic's license plate as it exited the neighborhood at 6:07 a.m. This was the last confirmed sighting of Elaine Park, driving off alone into the early morning dawn. When Elaine didn't return home later on January 28th and failed to answer her phone, her family grew concerned. Susan Park, Elaine's mother, tried calling and texting her repeatedly that day, but got no response. By the next day, January 29th, worry had set in among Elaine's loved ones. Susan contacted police to report her daughter missing, but initially police suggested Elaine might have just taken some time away since she was an adult. On Monday, January 30th, 2017, with still no sign of her daughter, Susan Park officially filed a missing person report. The case took a dramatic turn on February 2nd, 2017, when Elaine's car was found under strange circumstances. Investigators had been attempting to trace Elaine's movements through her cell phone signals. A ping from her phone indicated its last known location was near Malibu, California, along the Pacific Coast. Acting on this lead, Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies searched the area and discovered Elaine's 2015 Honda Civic parked on the shoulder of the Pacific Coast Highway. This was a beachside area about 20 miles from Div's home. The condition of the car raised immediate red flags. It was found in the middle of the day, yet the headlights were still switched on and the battery had died. The doors were unlocked and the keys were in the ignition, in the on position. But there was no sign of Elaine. Inside the vehicle, police found her personal items neatly left behind. Her cell phone, her backpack with a laptop, her ID and credit cards, cash, and a makeup bag were all sitting in the car. Nothing obvious was missing from the car, and there were no signs of struggle. Finding Elaine's car shifted the investigation into high gear. Initially, authorities treated Elaine as a possible voluntary missing adult, but after the car turned up, they reclassified her case as an involuntary missing person, indicating possible foul play. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and Glendale Police Department launched extensive searches around the area where the car was found. Search teams scoured the beach, nearby trails, and the rugged Santa Monica Mountains for any trace of Elaine. Cadaver dogs were brought in and combed the coastline and cliffs near where her vehicle was found, and divers searched the waters off Malibu's shore. Despite these efforts, no trace of Elaine was found on land or in the sea. After several days, the active search was scaled back, and investigators faced a frustrating lack of clues. Elaine had disappeared without a trace, and the trail had gone cold. Detectives interviewed everyone who had seen Elaine in her final days. Div Compier, the boyfriend who was the last known person to see Elaine, cooperated fully with police. He maintained that he had no idea what happened to her after she drove away. By March 2017, after reviewing the evidence and Div's alibi, Glendale police publicly stated that Divine Compier was not a suspect in Elaine's disappearance. With no definitive answers, numerous theories have emerged about what could have happened to Elaine Park. Importantly, all the theories I'm about to present are highly speculative, given the limited evidence available in this case. One theory is that Elaine may have died by her own hand near where her car was found. Those who support this idea point to her history of depression and the car's location by the ocean. It's conceivable that Elaine could have walked into the sea or hiked into the mountains intending to end herself. However, her family emphasizes that Elaine had never expressed these thoughts and had even made plans for the near future. Another theory suggests that she left to start a new life. However, running contrary to this theory is the fact that she left all her worldly possessions behind, which would have helped her in her apparent new life. The authorities consider this theory to be unlikely. Another possibility is that Elaine experienced some kind of accident after leaving her car. If she was in a disoriented or panicked state, she might have wandered off into the unfamiliar terrain of Malibu's canyons. The canyon area surrounding where her vehicle was found has steep cliffs, dense brush, and ocean currents nearby. It's conceivable she could have fallen into a ravine or been swept out to sea. But again, search teams, including bloodhounds and helicopters, found no evidence of an accident in the vicinity. This theory also struggles to explain why she would stop and exit her car with the keys left in it. Some have speculated that perhaps Elaine pulled over due to a medical episode, like a panic attack recurrence or even a substance reaction, and became lost or injured while seeking help. However, without any clues recovered, an accidental demise remains possible, but unconfirmed. Many consider it likely that Elaine met with foul play after leaving the Compier house. One scenario is that she was followed or abducted by an unknown predator on her way home. If someone with ill intent approached Elaine's car in Malibu, they might have coerced her out of the vehicle. The fact that her wallet, cash, and valuables were left untouched in the car suggests that robbery was not a motive. Instead, it could point to an abductor staging the scene to look like a voluntary disappearance. The location where the car was found, a pull-off by a beach, could have been chosen by a perpetrator who knew the area. Some have even raised the idea of a human trafficking situation or a random opportunistic crime. Others have speculated that she may have been involved in a substance deal gone wrong, which ended with a dealer slaying her. As discussed, Elaine was known to have difficulties with substances in the years leading up to her disappearance. At present, the true nature of Elaine Park's disappearance remains unknown, with more than 8 years having passed since her vanishing. Her case remains open and active, and she is officially classified as an endangered missing person. If she is still alive today, she would now be in her late 20s. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder for you to share this video with 2 of your friends or your family members. Also remember to hit like and subscribe, and also remember to ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Zora Fali was a boxer who dominated the heavyweight division for a time during the middle of the 20th century. He rose from humble beginnings to become a heavyweight boxing contender and even challenged the legendary Muhammad Ali for the world title. Outside the ring, Foley was a Korean War veteran, a respected family man, and a civic leader in Chandler, Arizona. Yet in July 1972, this accomplished life met a mysterious end. Foley died under suspicious circumstances at a motel swimming pool, an officially quote-unquote accidental death that many have questioned ever since. Turning professional in 1953, the 6'1" fighter racked up an impressive record of 79 wins, 11 losses, and 6 draws over 17 years. He climbed into the ring with many of the era's best, claiming victories over contenders like Eddie McKen, George Chuvalo, Oscar Bonavena, and many others. In October 1958, for example, Foley traveled to London to face British champion Henry Cooper in a high-profile bout. Though Foley was favored, Cooper pulled off an upset points victory, handing Foley a rare defeat on his otherwise stellar record. Undeterred, Foley continued to be a top-ranked contender for years, his consistent performance keeping him in the Ring magazine's top 10 heavyweight list for over a decade. Foley developed a reputation as a skilled, tactical boxer and a true gentleman of the sport. He neither smoked nor drank, and was known for his clean living and sportsmanship. Unlike many brash fighters, Foley was soft-spoken and courteous. This dignified demeanor made him a role model in his hometown of Chandler. Even as he fought heavyweight titans like Sonny Liston, who knocked him out in 1960, Foley remained steadfast and humble. By the mid-1960s, he was widely regarded as one of the best heavyweights never to have held a title. This was largely because champion Floyd Patterson's management had steered clear of him during Foley's prime. At long last, in March 1967, Zora Fali earned a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship, though the opportunity came at a time when Foley was already past his peak. Foley's title shot came against none other than Muhammad Ali, and it would become the defining fight of his career. And by the way, you can watch this full fight on YouTube if you're a boxing fan. The bout took place on March 22, 1967, at New York's Madison Square Garden. By then, Ali was at the height of his power, undefeated and flamboyant, while Foley was 36 years old and considered an aging challenger. In the lead-up to the fight, Ali was unusually restrained in his typical trash talk, finding little to criticize in the polite contender. That said, he couldn't help issuing some backhanded compliments, calling Foley a nice, sweet old family man. Notably, Foley was one of the first opponents to address the champion by his chosen Muslim name, rather than Cassius Clay, a sign of respect that Ali acknowledged. Some have speculated that this was the reason Ali's usually brash trash talk was so toned down for this fight. When the bell rang, Foley's experience and skill were on display. He started strong and gave the champ a competitive fight in the early rounds. Ultimately, however, Ali's speed and prime conditioning proved too much. In the seventh round, Ali caught Foley with a quick combination, knocking him out and retaining the title. After the bout, Ali remarked that, quote, "Things might have been different had we met 10 years ago," implying that Foley in his prime could have posed a serious threat. This fight, Foley's lone title challenge, was historically significant for another reason. It turned out to be Ali's last match before his 3-year exile from boxing, due to his draft refusal case. Foley retired from boxing in 1970, following a knockout loss to rising contender Mac Foster. He was 39 and ready to move on to the next phase of life. Foley had always prioritized his family. He and his wife, Joella, were raising 8 children, and he seamlessly transitioned into civilian life. He took a job as a car salesman and remained a beloved figure in Chandler. In 1970, the city appointed Foley to fill a vacancy on the Chandler City Council, capitalizing on his local fame and sterling reputation. In early July 1972, Foley traveled south from Chandler to the city of Tucson, Arizona, for reasons that remain unclear. On the evening of July 7, 1972, he checked into the Sands Motel in Tucson, reportedly under an assumed name, accompanied by an old acquaintance named Artis Broom. Also with them were Broom's wife Dorothy and another woman from Mesa, Arizona, named Ann Young. Broom was known by Foley's friends as a dubious hanger-on, a small-time celebrity friend whose close involvement with Foley had always been puzzling. Nonetheless, Foley apparently trusted him enough to pay a late-night visit. Sometime around midnight, an incident occurred at the motel's swimming pool that would prove fatal. According to the official police account, Foley and Artis Broom began engaging in playful roughhousing near the pool. What happened next is the subject of controversy more than a half-century later. According to one person, this rough horseplay led to Foley losing his balance, or perhaps being pushed, and falling into the pool, where he struck his head. Foley was pulled from the water gravely injured. One of the panicked women ran to the motel office and urgently summoned an ambulance. Paramedics rushed Foley to a nearby hospital, but it was too late. In the early hours of July 8, 1972, 41-year-old Zora Foley was pronounced dead from his injuries. The initial tragedy of a respected athlete dying in an apparent freak accident was compounded by the disturbing condition of Foley's body. His injuries didn't look like the result of a simple slip and fall. A motel employee who saw Foley after the incident described multiple wounds. He described large bumps on his forehead, a gaping wound, described as a hole on the top of his head, and another significant injury to the back of his skull. This was, as observers noted, pretty extensive damage for someone who ostensibly just hit his head falling into a swimming pool. One blow might be expected from an accidental fall, but 3 distinct head injuries in different spots raised immediate suspicions of foul play. The Tucson police, however, found no overt evidence of a crime at the scene, and quickly ruled Foley's death an accident. The case was essentially closed as an unfortunate mishap. No one was charged, and the other individuals present were not detained. Notably, the official paperwork surrounding the incident, most police reports, witness statements, and the medical examiner's findings were not released to the public. In fact, years later, researchers discovered that the records had effectively vanished. This lack of documentation has made it impossible to re-examine the case, locking the true details of Foley's death behind a wall of time and bureaucratic silence. With so many troubling details and so few official answers, it's no surprise that conspiracy theories have swirled around Zora Foley's death for decades. From the beginning, many observers found the accident narrative hard to accept. One theory suggests that he was lured to the motel under false pretenses and slain for reasons unknown. The most common reason given, which is purely speculative, is that there may have been a dispute over money. Some have speculated that Zora Fawley, who was known to be a generous and good-hearted person, may have lent money to someone who simply didn't feel like repaying him. Another persistent rumor is that Fawley's death was a mob-related attack. Organized crime had long tentacles in boxing during the mid-20th century, and some wonder if Fawley had crossed the wrong people. This theory gained a sliver of traction when Jet magazine reported that two suspicious-looking men were seen loitering around the motel on the night Fawley died. Fawley wasn't in debt, and no clear motive for an organized crime involvement has ever been identified, making this theory more speculative than substantiated. Some observers have raised the possibility that Fawley's race and the era's social climate played a role in the aftermath. They speculate that the Tucson police simply didn't want to conduct a meaningful investigation and simply closed their file out as soon as possible. Through all the speculation, Fawley's immediate family remained relatively quiet. His widow, Joella Fawley, has never spoken publicly about the incident and did not push for any further inquiries. Whether she accepted the official version or simply chose to avoid reliving the trauma is unknown. On a stormy night in June 1886, Bavarian King Ludwig II, the famed Mad King who built Neuschwanstein Castle, met an untimely and mysterious end. Late on June 13, 1886, Ludwig's body was found in the shallow waters of Lake Starnberg, just south of Munich, alongside the corpse of his personal physician. His death was officially ruled to be by his own hand, with him drowning himself, a conclusion reached after only a cursory examination. Yet from the very beginning, doubts plagued the official story. Over the next century, the bizarre circumstances of King Ludwig's death would prompt multiple investigations and fuel a host of conspiracy theories. In early June 1886, political intrigue was swirling around King Ludwig II. The eccentric monarch had alienated his ministers with his extravagant castle building and withdrawn lifestyle. This led them to conspire in having him declared mentally unfit to rule, despite him being a quite popular monarch. On June 10, 1886, a government commission arrived at Ludwig's fairy tale palace of Neuschwanstein to deliver his deposition. The next day, Ludwig was arrested and transported to Berg Castle, a lakeside estate that had been converted into a makeshift psychiatric holding place for the now deposed king. Dr. Gooden, the prominent psychiatrist who had certified Ludwig as insane without a personal examination, assumed responsibility for the monarch's custody and treatment. By the evening of June 13th, Ludwig had been a prisoner at Berg Castle for barely 24 hours. What happened on that fateful night would soon become the stuff of legend. On June 13th, 1886, at around 6:30 p.m., King Ludwig and Dr. Gooden set out for a stroll through the Berg Castle parkland along the shore of Lake Starnberg. Dr. Gooden oddly insisted that no attendants accompany them, a decision that left the vulnerable ex-king alone with his doctor as dusk fell. When the pair failed to return by 8 p.m. as expected, concern grew. A search party of the castle's staff and guards fanned out in a gale-driven rainstorm, combing the darkened shoreline by lantern light. It was around 10:30 p.m. when the horrified searchers finally spotted two figures in the water near the shore. King Ludwig and Dr. Gooden were found floating in waist-deep water, their heads and shoulders above the surface. Ludwig's pocket watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., suggesting the king's fate was sealed shortly after the start of their walk. Despite efforts at resuscitation, both men were cold and lifeless when pulled from the lake. The Bavarian authorities lost no time in declaring a cause of death. Following a brief on-site investigation and examination of the bodies, officials announced that King Ludwig II had ended himself by drowning in the lake. Further, they found that Dr. Gooden perished attempting to save the king, a story which would be built upon by the authorities. However, almost immediately, the evidence refused to line up neatly with this explanation. An autopsy on Ludwig's body revealed no water in his lungs, a finding starkly at odds with him intentionally seeking his demise by drowning. Observers noted that the water at the recovery site was only waist deep, and that Ludwig, an excellent swimmer, should have been able to stand up or save himself if he were conscious. In fact, his body was found with his head and shoulders well above the waterline, making the drowning claim even harder to accept. Curiously, Ludwig had not expressed any intent to end himself, despite the crisis that led to his removal. Meanwhile, Dr. Gooden's corpse told a violent tale. The 62-year-old doctor was found with blows to his head, bruises, and strangulation marks on his neck. His glasses were broken and there were scratches on his face, signs of a desperate struggle. The king's body, by contrast, showed only a scrape on one knee, and no visible wounds or trauma. So this may have you asking the obvious. If the official story says Ludwig had drowned on his own accord peacefully, how did they explain the savagery visited upon Gooden? The official story held that the Mad King must have attacked his doctor in a fit of insanity while the doctor was trying to rescue him. But the story didn't stop there. The official narrative quickly became that Ludwig had actually slain his personal physician in a fit of rage. As Ludwig's body was hurriedly interred in Munich with minimal delay, whispers began that the true story was being covered up. From the outset, the Bavarian government's handling of the case fueled public skepticism. Rather than invite transparency, officials moved to shroud the incident in secrecy. The members of the search party, including the king's footmen and a fisherman involved in recovering the bodies, were all sworn to silence by order of a government minister. They took oaths never to speak of what they had seen or knew. And curiously, they were ordered not to discuss anything related to it, even to a priest. For context, Bavaria was and remains a highly Catholic region of Germany, making such an oath extremely unusual. Such an extreme gag order struck many as suspicious, even at the time. If the deaths were as straightforward as they were claimed to be, why permanently muzzle everyone tangentially involved in the investigation? Further, why would people be forbidden from taking part in confession in relation to the investigation, and why would they need to confess anything to begin with? This climate of official secrecy only encouraged rumors. Indeed, within days of the tragedy, Ludwig's loyalists and ordinary Bavarians alike began to voice doubts about the official narrative. The idea that the former king would slay a man and then drown seemed both out of character and conveniently tidy for the same ministers who had just ousted him. Many started to suspect foul play, and after all, he had been the victim of a political coup on the basis of his mental health. It didn't escape notice that those who benefited most from Ludwig's demise were the very figures behind his deposition, including his uncle Prince Luitpold, who assumed the regency. For historical context, Prince Luitpold would effectively be the ruler of Bavaria for nearly 30 years, after Ludwig was replaced with King Otto. Notably, King Otto was completely mentally incapable and could be easily controlled by the prince. And yes, this does clearly call into question a major element of why this case continues to fascinate scholars and the public. Why remove Ludwig for being potentially mentally incapable while not doing the same for Otto, who was definitely mentally incapable? In this tense atmosphere, alternative theories about what really happened on the night of June 13th began to take root and multiply. Before long, a consensus formed among Ludwig's supporters that the king had been slain. One dark conjecture is that conspirators decided to eliminate Ludwig quietly once he was in custody. In fact, local fishermen reported hearing gunshots ring out across Lake Starnberg that night, an ominous detail that doesn't fit a drowning scenario. This gave early credence to the notion that unknown assailants might have been lying in wait. Some have speculated that two sharpshooters hid in a lakeside boathouse and, under cover of stormy darkness, eliminated both men. The motive was to prevent the deposed monarch from ever regaining power or rallying his supporters to his cause. Such claims remained speculative for decades due to a lack of concrete evidence. But as time went on, bits of testimony and hidden documents began to surface, keeping alternative theories alive and well. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence to emerge is the secret account of Jacob Little, King Ludwig's personal fisherman. Little was part of the search party on the night of June 13th, and it was from his boat that the bodies were ultimately discovered. Bound by the official oath of silence, Little never spoke publicly about what transpired. However, before his death in 1933, he left behind private writings describing a very different chain of events from the official version. Decades later, these notes came to light through his family, and their content is explosive. Little claimed that the king had been attempting to escape that night. According to Little's account, a rescue plan was in motion, and he had been retained by loyalists to get the king to safety. The fisherman had hidden his boat among the lakeside bushes, ready to ferry Ludwig to safety across the lake. From there, he was to be taken by loyalists to Austria, where his cousin Elizabeth was the empress. The fisherman knew nothing further of the plans of the loyalists. However, one can only imagine the international incident this would have sparked. The Kingdom of Bavaria was part of the German Empire, and Austria was an important ally of this newly united empire. Having the king of one of the constituent kingdoms of the empire building a power base in a neighboring country would obviously be problematic diplomatically. But let's get back to what the fisherman himself actually knew and witnessed. According to Little, Ludwig was shot as he stepped into a boat, and Gooden was struck while he remained on the shore. Little was able to flee successfully but was sworn to secrecy. Notably, a handwriting expert who examined the surviving pages of Little's diary in 1961 judged them to be authentic, suggesting this account was indeed written by the fisherman himself. That said, handwriting analysis can be quite problematic, and some have expressed doubts about the veracity of the fisherman's writings. Notably, not every historian or modern investigator subscribes to the sharpshooter theory. One hypothesis is that Ludwig did die during an escape attempt, but not in accordance with the previous account. Instead, he may have succumbed to a medical emergency brought on by the cold lake water. The night was chilly and the lake was very cold, and some have suggested the king suffered a heart attack or stroke during his frantic swim for freedom. In this scenario, Ludwig's collapse in the water could explain his death without drowning, consistent with the autopsy finding of empty lungs. Dr. Gooden's injuries might then be attributed to a confrontation on shore when he tried to stop Ludwig from fleeing. Another theory focuses blame on Dr. Gooden himself. It was known that Gooden carried sedatives and had boasted of techniques to subdue violent patients. One account holds that Gooden brought a bottle of chloroform on the walk. The chloroform could have rendered Ludwig unconscious, causing him to fall into the water and perish while partially incapacitated. Under this theory, it's speculated that Gooden tried to get him out of the water, which led to him sustaining injuries while the king flailed at him. According to this theory, Gooden then might have suffered a fatal heart attack from the shock or exertion, explaining why he too died in this circumstance. Still, others support the official theory, despite the substantial inconsistencies with it. In the end, though, every proposed scenario has its inconsistencies, and this 19th century mystery will likely never be fully solved. On the night of March 20th, 1995, 17-year-old Julie Ferguson left work at the Linens and Things store in Greenbelt, Maryland, and prepared to go out with friends. She was a junior at Eleanor Roosevelt High School, a bright, vivacious teen known for her love of music and close bonds with her friends. Around 9:30 p.m., after closing up the store, Julie waited outside in the Greenway Shopping Center for two friends who had promised to give her a ride that evening. Moments before, she had reassured her mother by phone that her friends were on their way to pick her up. The area was well lit by a nearby liquor store, and Julie sat on a brick planter box with a soda and a shopping bag by her side. Sometime before 10 p.m., witnesses saw Julie casually chatting with the occupants of a red four-door car that had pulled up near where she waited. There were 3 people in the vehicle, reportedly 2 young men and a young woman, and by all accounts, Julie seemed comfortable speaking with them. Observers noted no signs of distress or struggle at that time. However, by the time her friends arrived just after 10 p.m., Julie had vanished without a trace. All that remained were her belongings on the curb, including a bag of clothes and her soda bottle. Alarmed, her friends contacted Julie's mother and questioned the liquor store manager, quickly realizing something was terribly wrong. Within hours, Greenbelt police, aided by police helicopters, began searching the area for the missing teen. Tragically, the search ended early the next morning. At around 5:20 a.m. on March 21st, a pair of workers on their way to their job spotted Julie's body near a wooded stretch of Daisy Lane in Glendale, about 5 miles from the shopping center. She was found fully clothed on the remote roadside, and the manner of her death was brutal. An autopsy later revealed that Julie had been strangled and her throat had been slashed. There were no signs of essay, robbery, or any obvious motive for the attack. Simply put, there was absolutely nothing to explain why someone would target a normal girl who was just going about her evening. Julie's slaying sent shockwaves through the Greenbelt community, which was unaccustomed to such violent crime. In the days that followed, police worked around the clock interviewing dozens of people, but they struggled to develop solid leads. No immediate suspect emerged, and detectives could not determine a clear motive for the crime. Julie had no apparent enemies, and nothing obvious had been taken from her. Investigators quickly concluded that she had been abducted from the shopping center, but by whom and for what purpose remained a complete mystery. The only early clues were the witness accounts of the red car and the disturbing fact that some of Julie's personal items had been discarded along a roadway. Her ID, for instance, was later found tossed in the median of Greenbelt Road, about halfway between the mall and the location where her body was found. It appeared those responsible had scattered a few of her belongings while fleeing the area. The impact on Julie's peers was profound. 2 days after the slaying, well over 1,000 people gathered for a candlelight vigil at the Eleanor Roosevelt High School football field to mourn Julie and seek solace together. Grief counselors were made available to students overcome by the shock of losing a classmate in such a horrific way. Friends described feeling as if all the safety and all the security of their world had been stripped away overnight. Despite an intensive investigation in 1995, the case gradually went cold as months and then years passed without an arrest. The crime scene yielded little forensic evidence beyond some physical items belonging to Julie, and with no eyewitnesses to the abduction itself, detectives had few leads to pursue. About 5 years after the slaying, in March 2000, Prince George's County Police announced a renewed push in Julie's case, and with it, some intriguing new clues. Cold case investigators had spent months re-examining the evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. At a press conference on the case's 5-year anniversary, police revealed that previously overlooked witness accounts pointed to 3 suspects who might have been involved. Crucially, multiple people had reported seeing a red Volkswagen Jetta in the Greenway Center parking lot the night Julie disappeared. The occupants were described as 2 men and 1 woman in their early 20s, and all were noted to be black. One witness saw Julie leaning in the window of this car, talking to the occupants shortly before she vanished. Another witness came forward to say they had spotted a similar vehicle in the early morning hours parked along a remote stretch of Daisy Lane, with its headlights on. Notably, this was in the very area where Julie's body was later discovered, giving rise to suspicions that this may have been the occupants of the vehicle dumping her body. By the time that witness passed the spot again, the car was gone. Around this same period, police explored a lead involving a different possible suspect entirely. They identified a person of interest, who was a white male who was believed to have been preying on young women near the University of Maryland campus in the mid-1990s. This individual was thought to have attempted abductions in the area, raising suspicions that Julie could have been a victim of a serial predator. However, after extensive efforts, investigators were unable to track that man down or link him to the crime. The focus remained on the trio in the red car, even as the case once again began to stall for lack of concrete proof. Over the years, several theories have emerged about who was responsible for the slaying of Julie Ferguson, but many have led to dead ends. Aside from the theories already discussed, two young men who knew Julie were also investigated as possible suspects. However, both of them failed to match up to DNA found at the scene, and there was nothing concrete to link either men to the abduction and subsequent events. The primary theory that law enforcement still focuses on centers around the three unknown individuals in the red car. Investigators have urged any of these three people to come forward for questioning in an effort to potentially clear their names if they weren't involved. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder for you to share this video with two of your friends or your family members. Also, remember to hit like and subscribe. And also, remember to ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Robert Camus was, by all accounts, a respectable individual leading a quiet life in Brant County, Ontario in Canada. He worked as a welder at a fabrication company in nearby Cambridge and rented part of a house on West River Road in the community of Paris, Ontario. The last day anyone saw Robert was Sunday, March 31st, 1996, Easter Sunday. He spent that day around his home on West River Road. In the late afternoon, around 5 p.m., a neighbor's daughter noticed Camus outside changing a tire on his truck. By early evening, that same neighbor grew concerned. She hadn't seen Robert since and decided to check on him, and what she found has haunted the community ever since. Around 7 p.m., the neighbor arrived at Camus' residence and discovered the front door wide open, with music blaring from inside on repeat. According to reports, the song on repeat was by the band Hootie and the Blowfish, though I wasn't able to find out which song it was. I'm not overly familiar with this band, but my understanding from a quick Spotify journey is that their songs are fairly upbeat in general. Given the theories about what happened, let's just say that the type of music playing may have provided some further insight into Robert Camus' headspace. But I digress. Stepping inside, the neighbor found Camus' dog alone in the house. The loyal pet was unharmed except for a small cut on her head, suggesting she may have been struck or injured during whatever transpired. Oddly, Camus' wallet was still in the house and his pickup truck sat in the driveway. It appeared he hadn't planned to go anywhere far. Scattered CDs littered the floor as if there had been a disturbance. Outside, the driveway revealed peculiar tire tracks, as though another vehicle had peeled away at high speed. Alarmed, the neighbor ventured down toward the nearby banks of the Grand River, a spot Robert often frequented on walks with his dog, and called out for him into the dusk. With darkness closing in and Robert still nowhere to be found, the neighbor contacted the Brant County, Ontario Provincial Police to report him missing. By the next morning, April 1st, it was evident that Robert Camus had truly vanished. When he failed to show up for work at his welding job that Monday, those who knew him grew even more concerned. Simply put, Robert wasn't the sort of person to go AWOL from his responsibilities, so this was incredibly out of character. Police officers had already been alerted by the neighbor's call the night before, and they arrived at Camus' home to investigate the strange scene. They found the door still ajar, the stereo still looping the same song, and Camus' dog anxiously waiting for her owner. There were no signs of Robert himself. It was as if he had stepped out briefly and intended to return, but something prevented him from coming back. The Brant County OPP immediately launched an intensive search of the area. They brought in a canine unit to track Robert's scent, hoping the dogs might lead them to a clue in the surrounding fields or along the riverbank. Unfortunately, heavy rain had started that evening, and the downpour washed away any reliable scent trails that might have existed. Undeterred, authorities called in a helicopter to scan the region from above, and officers on foot combed through brush, woods, and along the cold, swift waters of the Grand River. Despite these efforts, no trace of Robert was found that night or in the days immediately following. As the investigation unfolded, police canvassed the neighborhood and spoke with those who knew Robert. Investigators interviewed his family members, friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, trying to piece together any hints of what might have happened or where he could be. Nothing in Camus' financial records or personal life offered an obvious lead. For instance, there were no sudden bank withdrawals, no suspicious notes left behind, and no known conflicts with enemies. In fact, as a result of the investigation, it came out that he didn't seem to have any enemies to speak of whatsoever. That said, that didn't mean all was well in his life. He had been described as feeling despondent in the time leading up to his disappearance, grappling with the fallout of a romantic relationship, and worry over a relative's serious illness. In fact, Robert had recently asked his on-and-off girlfriend to marry him, and she had declined his proposal, which hurt him deeply. Still, those close to him insist he was coping, and had even mentioned future plans. These personal struggles led some to wonder if Robert might have simply left of his own accord, or chose to end himself in despair, but evidence for those theories was scarce. Early on, police received one intriguing tip. There were reports that just days before he vanished, Robert Camus had been seen in the company of two unidentified men driving a pickup truck. According to a neighbor's recollection, on the weekend prior to his disappearance, two men, believed to be fellow welders, had come by to visit Robert at his home. It struck her as a bit odd, as she wasn't sure why they would visit. Now, personally, I don't see what sounds so odd about a welder having two welders show up at his house. People tend to socialize with people in their own profession, but regardless, this lead appears to have been taken as significant by investigators. Also, I'm not entirely certain how the neighbor was so certain that the men were welders, but once again, I digress. And as always, it's important to note that, for open investigations, we simply don't have access to all the evidence, and there may be a reason why this event has been given so much weight. This lead suggested that Camus' disappearance might not have been entirely accidental, and perhaps these individuals knew something about where he went or what happened. The police appealed to the public for any information about these two men, hoping they might come forward or be identified. Unfortunately, that avenue didn't immediately solve the case. The identities and intentions of those men in the pickup truck remain unknown to this day, and it's not confirmed if they were connected to Robert's fate in any way. Weeks turned into months, and still there was no sign of Robert Camus. Over the years, the case gradually grew cold, though law enforcement continued to keep Camus in their missing persons database and would periodically revisit the file as tips trickled in. At one point, In the late 1990s, Camus' brother even sought out the help of a psychic in desperation. The psychic claimed to have a vision that Robert was struck on the head with a shovel and buried in a shallow grave on his own property. This gruesome suggestion prompted the family to arrange a thorough search of the grounds around the house. They brought in specialized equipment capable of detecting disturbances under the soil, hoping to find any hint of a burial site. The exhaustive search, however, yielded nothing, absolutely no remains, and no clues. The psychic who offered this quote-unquote assistance ghosted them afterwards, leaving the family to believe they had been taken in by a grifter. In the absence of concrete evidence, a number of theories have been debated about what happened to Robert Camus. Officially, the Brant County OPP has never declared the case a slaying or an accident. It remains an open missing person investigation. One possibility considered early on was that Robert, distraught over personal problems, might have chosen to leave his life behind voluntarily. According to his friends, Robert had once dated a woman who later assumed a new identity and essentially vanished to start life anew. Some have theorized that Robert was aware that disappearing was indeed possible because of this experience. In theory, he could have decided to do something similar, walking away from his job, family, and everything he knew to begin again somewhere else under a different name. His family holds on to a glimmer of hope that this could be the case, dreaming that perhaps he is out there living quietly under a new identity. Another theory suggests that Camus may have walked away from his life in a very literal way, given his emotional state around that time. Investigators learned he was upset about his girlfriend rejecting his marriage proposal and worried about a close relative's cancer diagnosis. Depression and despair might have overwhelmed him. If he had chosen to end himself somewhere in the remote countryside or the river, that might explain why he was never found. However, supporters of this theory acknowledge a major counterpoint. No physical evidence has ever surfaced, despite extensive searching. Further, those who knew him didn't think that he would simply leave his dog abandoned and helpless. They've also questioned why he wouldn't leave a note to explain the situation to his family and friends. That said, people don't always leave these notes, and oftentimes they're in a mental state where they truly believe no one will miss them, even if this is the furthest thing from reality. Another theory suggests that he may have met his end accidentally. Those familiar with the area note that there are old open wells that are essentially concealed in the rural countryside that could function as traps. Some speculate that he may have gone for a country stroll to work off some stress or frustration, gone off the beaten path, and fallen into one of these wells. Many lean toward a more sinister explanation: foul play at the hands of others. The clues at the scene hint at a possible confrontation. The hurried tire tracks could indicate another vehicle leaving in a rush, and the dog's minor injury raises questions about a scuffle. Many believe that the loyal pooch may have come to the defense of her owner and been beaten back by the assailants. This theory tends to turn upon the two unidentified men in the pickup truck as being the responsible individuals. Theorists have speculated that perhaps an argument or unexpected incident occurred that resulted in Robert being taken away against his will. Because Camus lived in a somewhat rural area, it's conceivable that if a crime occurred, the perpetrators had the cover of seclusion to do it quietly. Without solid evidence, no theory can be proven, and at present, the case of Robert Camus remains a disturbing unsolved mystery with no resolution in sight. Deep in the remote sands of the Gobi Desert, a terrifying legend has taken shape. Mongolian herders whisper of a deadly creature lurking beneath the dunes, a worm-like monster known locally as the Olgoi Korkoi, or large intestine worm. In Western lore, it's called the Mongolian death worm, an alleged beast said to kill with a mere touch, or even at a distance. According to traditional accounts, this blood-red, sausage-shaped creature can spit corrosive venom and even deliver lethal electric shocks to its victims. Tales of the Olgoi Korkoi have circulated in Mongolia for generations, long before outsiders heard of it. The very name paints a visceral image. Locals liken it to a cow's intestine, vividly conveying its reported shape and coloration. Early 20th century expeditions in Mongolia brought the first Western documentation of this legend. In 1919, American explorer Roy Chapman Andrews, often styled as a quote-unquote real-life Indiana Jones, met with Mongolian officials who startled him with an unusual request. They asked if he could capture a live specimen of this elusive creature and bring it back to them for further examination. Andrews, being an Indiana Jones type, of course agreed to this, but was unable to ever locate a real Olgoi Korkoi. Andrews noted that none of them had seen the animal themselves, but all were convinced it was a legitimate beast. Notably, even the well-educated Mongolian prime minister recounted stories of the supposed animal to him, indicating that this wasn't simply a backcountry superstition. These meetings, and the quest for the creature, were recounted in Andrews' 1926 book On the Trail of Ancient Man, which introduced the West to the Mongolian deathworm legend. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Soviet researchers in the Gobi also collected local tales. And for a little bit of historical context, at the time, Mongolia had fallen fully into the Soviet sphere of influence. Explorers A.D. Simakov and Ivan Yefremov heard many stories of the Olgoi Korkoi, consistently depicting a lethal sausage-like worm that lived underground and surfaced after rains. If a person spotted the creature, the only advice was to flee. These early reports agreed on the core image of the death worm, a burrowing, legless nightmare, but beyond that, details varied wildly. Some Mongolian storytellers swore the worm was barely a foot long, while others insisted it could grow as large as a man. It was described as red or brown, sometimes with indistinct features at its ends, leading some to say it had spikes, or that you couldn't tell head from tail. Some stories of the creature included more obvious fantastical elements, like suggesting that it could fly away if it was prevented from burrowing. During Mongolia's communist era in the mid-20th century, talk of the death worm was reportedly discouraged or outright banned, reinforcing an air of mystery around it. Despite the silence, the legend lived on in nomadic oral tradition, awaiting a time when curious outsiders would pick up its trail. By the late 20th century, the Mongolian death worm had captured the imagination of adventurers and scientists alike. In 1983, a Soviet research team led by Yuri Gorilov, a conservationist working in the Gobi, stumbled upon a clue that could explain the legend. They heard rumors that an old herder had actually captured a live Olgoi Korkoi near a remote oasis. Rushing to the scene, Gorilov saw movement in a hole and reached in barehanded, defying local warnings. What he pulled out was a fat, blunt-headed snake known as a Tartar sand boa. To Gorilov's surprise, every local Mongolian present identified the snake as the death worm itself. The Tartar sand boa is a non-venomous, burrowing snake about 2 to 3 feet long, with a thick body that could resemble a worm or legless lizard to the untrained eye. This discovery suggested that the terrifying worm might not be a worm at all, but rather a case of mistaken identity. Soviet scientists noted that the sand boa's appearance fit many descriptions: a stout, cylindrical creature that lurks under sand and occasionally surfaces, especially in wetter conditions. However, its very mundane nature stood in stark contrast to the deadly powers attributed to the Olgoi Korkoi. Still, not everyone was convinced by the sand boa explanation. No snake or legless lizard was known to spit acid or emit electric shocks, as the deathworm allegedly did. To believers, Gorilov's find explained only a fraction of the lore. They pointed out that tales of the Olgoi Korkoi predated scientific awareness of the sand boa, and that Mongolian nomads surely knew a snake when they saw one. Personally, I find that last part hard to believe, since they definitely thought that the creature they showed Gorilov was a real Mongolian deathworm. The first concerted effort to hunt the Mongolian deathworm came in the 1990s, just as Mongolia opened its borders after decades of isolation. In 1990, Czech adventurer Ivan Mackerly led a small team into the deepest reaches of the Gobi, determined to find the truth behind the legend. Mackerly, an engineer-turned-adventurer with a passion for unexplained mysteries, was inspired by Frank Herbert's famous sci-fi novel Dune. Taking a cue from the fictional sandworms of Dune and drawing upon his engineering background, his team built a motorized device. This machine pounded the ground rhythmically in hopes of drawing the subterranean beast to the surface. They roared across desert dunes in a Soviet-made off-road vehicle for 2 months, interviewing nomads and scanning the sands for any sign of the elusive worm. Locals couldn't even advise what bait to use as no one knew the creature's diet. So the team naturally resorted to creative tactics, like using explosives to try to scare the creature to the surface when their makeshift machine didn't work. Mackerly's 1990 expedition, though it didn't catch a monster, made a strong impression and raised the profile of this beast tremendously. Undeterred, Mackerly returned to Mongolia in 1992 for a second search, this time consulting local shamans for guidance and going fully down the Olgoi Korkoi hole. One shaman issued an ominous caution. The Olgoi Korkoi was no mere animal, he said, but a malevolent spirit of the desert. Interpreting what this shaman said, I think we may be able to infer that he meant something along the lines of, "Bro, it's definitely not real, but good luck." In 2004, Ivan Mackerly embarked on a third and final mission to the Gobi. This time he took to the skies in an ultralight aircraft, surveying the vast desert from above for any anomalous movement or tracks. From the air, the Gobi's expanse only reinforced how improbable it would be to find a single worm-like animal, if it even existed at all. Like the expeditions before, no hard evidence emerged. Mackerly, who had spent a good portion of his life chasing the death worm and other mysteries, admitted later in a 2007 interview that he had grown more skeptical about the creature. To date, every attempt to find this creature has turned up empty-handed. However, some still speculate that the Mongolian deathworm may be an animal that has yet to be documented by science. While it's universally accepted that the creature has had several layers of legend overlaid upon it, the fact that there may be a kernel of truth keeps adventurers searching. On September 20th, 2004, a group of walkers in the Yorkshire Dales made a grim discovery. Along a remote stretch of the Pennine Way between Pennygint and Horton in Ribblesdale, they spotted the body of a young woman lying in a mountain stream. No identification was found with the body, and local residents and police alike were initially baffled as to who she was and how she had died. In the absence of a name, the mystery woman came to be known as the Lady of the Hills, a reference to the rugged hill country where she was found. When detectives arrived at the scene in 2004, they noted that the victim appeared to be of Southeast Asian origin. She was approximately 25 to 35 years old and quite petite, just under 5 feet in height. She had shoulder-length dark hair and was found partially clothed, wearing only a pair of Marks and Spencer jeans and socks. The rest of her clothing, including whatever top or jacket she had on, was missing. A post-mortem examination indicated that she had been dead for 1 to 3 weeks before her body was discovered, meaning she likely died in late August or early September 2004. The initial autopsy could not determine an exact cause of death. Importantly, there were no obvious signs of violence, and investigators ruled out hypothermia as well. With no clear evidence of foul play at that time, police considered the possibility of a natural or accidental death. For years, the cause of the Lady of the Hills' demise remained officially unexplained, and the focus of the investigation turned toward identifying her rather than investigating a slaying. Identifying the young woman proved to be a daunting challenge. No one matching her description had been reported missing in the area or nationally at the time. Police pursued leads in the UK and even internationally, given the indication that she was likely from Asia. They released forensic artist impressions of her face and appealed to communities, including the possibility that she could have been a woman who was brought to Britain for marriage. In 2016, a cold case review unit of the North Yorkshire Police took a fresh look at the unsolved file. Advances in forensic science had been made since the early 2000s, and detectives hoped modern techniques might shed new light on the mystery. Indeed, over the next couple of years, investigators managed to piece together a more detailed profile of the unknown woman. Scientific tests supported the original hunch that she was from Southeast Asia, and other evidence began to suggest that her death was not due to misadventure. In 2018, the cold case team announced a startling conclusion. The Lady of the Hills had been slain. This marked a significant shift in the investigation. What had long been treated as an unexplained death was now officially something much more sinister. Detectives still didn't know the victim's name, but they had a strong suspicion about her background. They went public with a theory that she was likely a Thai woman who had come to the UK as the wife of a British man. By early 2019, those appeals finally yielded the breakthrough investigators needed. A BBC News article about the cold case, including details of the Thai bride theory, was widely shared and eventually reached a remote corner of northeast Thailand. There, a couple saw the report and a drawing of what she may have looked like, and immediately felt a jolt of recognition. The Thai family contacted North Yorkshire Police, telling them that they feared the woman in the Yorkshire Dales might be their missing daughter, Lamduan. Lamduan, they explained, had married an Englishman and moved to Britain years earlier. She had last been in touch with her Thai relatives in 2004, and then suddenly all communication stopped. The worried parents had heard nothing from her in the years since, and now, seeing the news from Yorkshire, they suspected the worst. Police moved quickly, and DNA samples were obtained from Lamduan's mother and father in Thailand and compared against the unidentified woman's remains. The results confirmed the parents' intuition. The Lady of the Hills was indeed Lamduan Armitage. In March 2019, North Yorkshire Police publicly announced the identification of Lamduan. She was around 36 years old at the time of her death, and, as it turned out, a married mother of 3 children living in England. With Lamduan's identity confirmed, attention turned to her backstory. Who was Lamduan, and how did she come to be in the Yorkshire Dales that September day in 2004? In June 1990, while in her early 20s, she met a British man named David Armitage in Chiang Mai, Thailand. David was working as an English teacher at the time, and the two fell in love and decided to marry. In January 1991, they were wed in Bangkok at the British Embassy. Not long after, Lamduan left her home country to start a new life in the United Kingdom with her husband. Lamduan's early years in Britain saw the couple moving around to different parts of the country. They lived in several places, including the city of Portsmouth on the south coast, the town of Rugby in the Midlands, and later the Preston area in the north of England. During this time, Lamduan became a mother, and by 2004, she had 3 young children. and the family was living in northern England. Friends and acquaintances recalled her as a petite, soft-spoken woman. According to information later given by her family, Lamduan worked for a time in a Thai restaurant in England. However, all was not well behind the scenes, and Lamduan's parents would later reveal that their daughter often phoned home in distress. In those calls, she confided that her marriage was troubled, and she allegedly told her mother that her husband, David, abused her. These deeply worrying phone calls continued up until 2004, when Lamduan suddenly stopped contacting her family. It appears that at some point that year, likely around late summer, she vanished from the life she had been living in England. No official missing person report was filed for Lamduan in the UK at the time. In fact, it later emerged that David Armitage never reported his wife missing to British authorities when she disappeared. This critical omission meant that when Lamduan's body was found in the Yorkshire Dales, there was no immediate link to any known missing person case. Lamduan's parents in Thailand also had no way to report her missing in the UK. They only knew that communication had ceased. Unaware of her fate, they spent years hoping for answers. Identifying Lamduan was a massive step forward in the investigation, but it also raised pressing questions about how she died. With the slaying now confirmed, detectives needed to piece together Lamduan's final movements and relationships. Naturally, attention focused on the person who knew Lamduan best in England, her husband David. In 2019, after Lamduan's identity was confirmed, David Armitage was located in Thailand, where he had been residing for many years. In fact, David had returned to Thailand not long after Lamduan's death in 2004. He went back to working as an English teacher, taking up a post at a university in western Thailand. By all accounts, he had built a new life there, and he had never been questioned by police, either in Thailand or the UK, about Lamduan's disappearance during the intervening years. As the case heated up following the 2019 breakthrough, North Yorkshire police made it clear that they wanted to speak with Lamduan's husband. He was, in effect, the last known person to see her alive, and the fact that he didn't report her missing raised serious suspicions. However, because David Armitage was overseas, British detectives couldn't simply bring him in for an interview without cooperation from Thai authorities. In public statements, David vehemently denied any involvement in Lamduan's death. In one interview with the press, he insisted he was innocent and claimed he had nothing to do with whatever happened to his wife. It was also reported that David had told people that Lamduan had, quote, run off back to Thailand in 2004, which he implied was why he hadn't alerted British police of her absence. To investigators, however, these explanations only raised further questions. Throughout 2019 and the years that followed, North Yorkshire police worked methodically to build their case. They liaised with Thai counterparts and navigated the legal processes required for an international investigation. Progress was slow, in part due to bureaucratic hurdles, and later because of the events of 2020 putting many plans on hold. It wasn't until early 2023 that a significant on-the-ground step was taken. In February 2023, a team of North Yorkshire cold case detectives and family liaison officers traveled to Thailand to advance the investigation. Over the course of about 2 weeks, they met with Lamduan's parents. They also worked alongside Thailand's Department of Special Investigations, conducting interviews throughout the country in places connected to Lamduan's past and David's present. By late 2024, nearly 2 decades after Lamduan's death, the investigation was reaching a critical point. Behind the scenes, authorities in the UK and Thailand coordinated to finally bring David Armitage in for questioning, and in January 2025, Thai officials took action. David Armitage, now 61 years old, was detained by police in Thailand in connection with Lamduan's case. Specifically, on January 23, 2025, officers in Kanchanaburi arrested him on a UK warrant for Lamduan slaying. This operation involved Thailand's immigration authorities as well, as David's visa status was reviewed and revoked, rendering his stay in Thailand illegal. He was taken into custody in Bangkok, while arrangements were made to deport him to the United Kingdom. According to official reports, once Thai authorities approved his deportation, David was put on a flight to London under escort. Upon arrival at Heathrow Airport, British police were waiting. David Armitage was immediately arrested by North Yorkshire Police on suspicion of the slaying of Lamduan Armitage in 2004. For 3 days, detectives interviewed him extensively about the events of 2004 and the circumstances that led to Lamduan's death. After those initial interrogations, however, the case didn't proceed as one may have expected. By February 4th, 2025, North Yorkshire Police announced that the suspect had been released on conditional bail while their inquiries continued. In other words, David Armitage was no longer in custody, but he remained under active investigation and subject to certain restrictions while detectives gathered further evidence. As of 2025, no criminal charges have yet been filed in the death of Lamduan, and the true nature of what happened to her remains unknown. I hope to have an update on this unsolved mystery in a future episode of this series. Paul Fugate was a veteran park ranger at Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. On Sunday, January 13, 1980, the 41-year-old Fugate was on duty at the monument's visitor center when he stepped outside to hike a nearby trail. He told a colleague he was going to do a trail and left wearing his National Park Service uniform, including his ranger badge and a green jacket, expecting to be back soon. However, Paul never returned from this routine patrol. By nightfall, concern began to grow extremely rapidly. A seasonal park employee staying at Paul's residence became alarmed when he did not come home after dark and alerted the park superintendent. That evening, the superintendent and 2 others searched nearby trails with flashlights, calling out Paul's name in the cold canyon air, but found no trace of him. The following morning, a full-scale search was launched. On January 14, 1980, the Cochise County Sheriff's Office organized a search and rescue operation, soon joined by National Park Service personnel and other agencies. Over the next 2 weeks, an intensive search effort scoured Chiricahua's rugged terrain. Teams of rangers and volunteers, eventually numbering over 20 people and a search dog, combed the trails and canyons, assisted by a National Guard helicopter overhead. Would-be rescuers rappelled into steep rocky crevices and fanned out in a line to inspect every ravine and gully within at least a half-mile radius of the visitor center. Despite these exhaustive efforts, not a single piece of evidence was found. One set of footprints initially raised hope until searchers realized the prints belonged to one of their own team members. Aside from that, the search turned up nothing. No clothing, no equipment, and no sign of Paul Fugate. After roughly 2 weeks, the official ground search was scaled back, with Paul still missing. In the months and years following his disappearance, volunteer search parties occasionally combed the backcountry beyond the initial grid, checking remote trails and even old mine shafts. Tips and purported sightings of the missing ranger trickled in from around the country, but none led to a breakthrough. In one instance, a man spotted in New Mexico turned out to be a different individual, and a report of someone resembling Paul in the Florida Keys also proved false. Despite the Fugate family's persistence, no physical evidence of Paul Fugate has ever been recovered. To this day, he remains the only National Park Service ranger to vanish without a trace and never be found. From the outset, law enforcement suspected that Fugate's disappearance involved foul play. After the fruitless initial search, authorities began treating the case as a possible crime, rather than a lost hiker incident. A formal missing person investigation was opened in 1980 and has technically remained open ever since. Early on, a notable lead emerged. About 5 days after Paul went missing, a park volunteer named Richard Horton recalled a disturbing sight from the day of January 13th. Horton and his wife had been driving in the area when they passed a pickup truck speeding away from the scene. Personally, I find it weird that this memory took 5 days to resurface, but hey, that's just me, and maybe I'm too skeptical. In the brief glimpse, Horton believed he may have seen Paul Fugate slumped between two men in the truck's cab traveling at high speed. Investigators found this account compelling enough that at the end of January 1980, they arranged for Horton to undergo hypnosis to dredge up details of the memory. Under hypnosis, Horton described the vehicle as a dark green pickup with a camper shell. He stated that the driver was a bearded man in his 30s, wearing a plaid shirt, and a second man in the truck was wearing a green jacket resembling the Park Service coat Fugate had. Horton recalled that Paul looked sad and dejected, as if he were semi-conscious or being held against his will. There were even reports from other park staff around that time of skid marks on a dirt road near the faraway ranch area and potential signs of a scuffle in the dirt. This lent some credence to the abduction theory, but despite these leads, no suspects were identified. If Paul had indeed been kidnapped or slain on January 13th, the perpetrators had a head start before investigators honed in on that scenario. Law enforcement pursued various tips and theories in the ensuing months, but progress was elusive. In July 1983, the Cochise County Sheriff's Office publicly stated that new information had led them to conclude Paul had been slain. They made an official announcement that the arrest of more than one person was imminent. This clearly raised hopes that the mystery was on the verge of being solved. However, no arrests were ever made in connection with the case, and the leads underlying that 1983 announcement apparently ultimately went cold. Given that the investigation is still open, the true nature of this announcement and why it never led to an arrest remains unknown. However, before this 1983 announcement, there was a slight hiccup in the case. Since he was missing in the line of duty, Paul's wife, Dodie Fugate, continued to be paid his salary, a source of apparent contention in the Park Service. In early 1981, Howard Chapman, the Park Service's Western Regional Director, reviewed the case and made a harsh determination. He declared that Paul Fugate had likely voluntarily abandoned his position. This bureaucratic ruling treated the disappearance not as an on-duty tragedy, but as an apparent desertion. The Park Service formally fired Paul retroactively for being absent without leave, halted the salary payments to his wife, and even demanded that she return the wages paid. And to add insult to injury, the Park Service wanted significant interest payments on everything that had been previously paid out. This seems to be an incredibly harsh and bizarre stance to have taken given the circumstances of the case. But as you'll see in a couple minutes, Paul may not have been liked by the higher-ups. After an outcry, the service agreed not to force an immediate repayment, but instead planned to recoup that sum from Fugate's federal retirement account. Dodie Fugate was informed she had no right to appeal this decision, because in a Kafkaesque twist, any appeal needed to be filed personally by the employee himself within 20 days. This was an impossible condition given that Paul was of course missing. Dodie fought back, seeking support from officials and lawmakers. The case caught the attention of Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater's office, and his office applied pressure on the Park Service to reconsider its stance. In 1986, 6 years after Paul's disappearance, the Park Service finally revisited the case in depth. After examining every report, witness statement, and search record, The 1986 review team concluded there was no evidence that Paul Fugate had staged his own disappearance. Further, they found no evidence that he was still somewhere out there, alive and living his best life. In the absence of definitive answers, several theories have emerged about what happened to Paul Fugate. Investigators and those who knew Fugate agree on one point: foul play is the most likely explanation. Both the evidence and the broader context suggest that Paul probably encountered dangerous individuals on his hike and met with violence. The Chiricahua National Monument is not only remote and mountainous, but also lies in Cochise County, about 80 miles north of the Mexican border. In 1980, the region was beginning to see increased activity from substance traffickers using routes through the Chiricahua Corridor. This is an area historically used by smugglers moving all manner of illicit cargo northward. Paul had gone hiking in the Faraway Ranch section of the monument, which was, and remains, a relatively secluded area. In fact, Faraway Ranch and the surrounding terrain would later gain notoriety as a haven for smuggling. Decades after Fugate's disappearance, in 2014, a park employee was violently assaulted at Faraway by cartel affiliates, underscoring the real dangers present in that area. Given this context, a prevalent theory is that Paul accidentally stumbled upon smugglers or other criminals on January 13, 1980, after which he was permanently silenced. Another theory, considered early on but largely discredited by the evidence, is that Paul Fugate intentionally disappeared of his own free will. In the initial stages of the investigation, some officials posited that Fugate might have become disillusioned with his job or personal life and chosen to walk away forever. This idea was partly fueled by Fugate's personality and history. He was known as a bit of a nonconformist within the Park Service, famously one of the first rangers to defy the agency's strict grooming standards. Years before, he had even been briefly fired in 1970 for not cutting his hair, only winning back his position after a legal battle that lasted until 1976. Because of this maverick streak, some wondered in 1980 if Paul had grown tired of the Park Service's rules or of other aspects of his life. There was talk of marital strain and even speculation that Paul might have secretly followed an allegedly pregnant girlfriend to another city. However, no credible evidence ever supported the notion that Fugate disappeared deliberately. In fact, tangible evidence strongly contradicts it. When authorities searched Fugate's home, they found that he had left behind virtually everything important to him. He left his wallet, around $300 in cash, an extensive and valuable weapon collection, high-end camera equipment, and even an antique truck he was in the process of restoring. Nothing was missing except Paul himself, a fact that implies he had fully expected to return. While it's impossible to completely rule out that Fugate could have vanished by choice, the consensus today is that this theory is highly implausible given the circumstances. Others have speculated that he may have fallen into a crevice or an abandoned mine shaft or fallen victim to some sort of other natural hazard. Some have even suggested he could have been felled by an attack from a wild animal. All these theories, though, are completely unproven, and given the extensive searches for him, it seems likely some trace of him would have been found. At present, the most likely theory remains that he came upon some bad men from south of the border. And this is the theory I personally think is most likely. While it isn't evidence, of course, I've read numerous accounts online about the inherent dangers in this area due to it being a corridor for international crime. I suspect that someone with a bit of a maverick streak like Paul may have been more likely to intervene on his own in a situation where he ought to have called for backup. Or perhaps he saw a situation where he simply had to intervene, given that someone was facing the imminent and immediate threat of harm. Also, just as a quick aside, the Park Service treating him like a common criminal and coming after his likely widow really rubs me the wrong way. After all, This is a guy who very well could have given his life up heroically in the line of duty. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder that I also have a true crime channel and historical mysteries channel you can check out after you finish up this video. Also remember to hit like and subscribe, and also remember to ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Ray Gricar was a respected district attorney in Center County, Pennsylvania, known for his meticulous and ethical approach to justice. In April 2005, just months before his planned retirement, the 59-year-old prosecutor vanished without a trace. Nearly 20 years later, his disappearance remains one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing cold cases. On the morning of Friday, April 15, 2005, Ray Gricar decided to take a day off from work. He told his live-in girlfriend, Patty Fornicola, that he was going to enjoy the sunny weather with a drive to Lewisburg, a town about 50 miles east of his home in Bellefonte. Around 11:30 a.m., Gricar called Patty to say he was driving along Route 192 and enjoying the ride. He told her, "I love you," in what would be their last conversation. He promised to be home later that evening, but when Gricar did not return home that night, Patty became concerned. After several hours of unanswered calls, she called in to report him missing. Local police and state troopers were alerted that the district attorney had failed to come home, an alarming and out-of-character situation. The next day, April 16th, authorities launched an urgent search for Gricar and his distinctive vehicle. Police even used a helicopter to scan roadways from above, looking for any sign of an accident involving his red and white Mini Cooper. That afternoon, a state trooper spotted Gricar's Mini Cooper parked in a dirt parking lot on the outskirts of Lewisburg, near an antique mall known as the Street of Shops. The car was about 45 miles from Gricar's home, just as he had indicated to his girlfriend, and was situated not far from the banks of the Susquehanna River. Investigators noted that there were no obvious signs of foul play at the scene, and the vehicle was locked, with no damage to it whatsoever. However, some puzzling clues emerged. Gricar's cell phone was found inside the car, powered off and left behind on the seat. More strangely, ashes were discovered on the passenger side floor, and the car smelled of tobacco. This was immediately deemed unusual because Gricar was a non-smoker who actively disliked the smell of tobacco smoke and was unlikely to allow anyone to smoke in his car. The car keys were missing and have never been found, and Gricar's wallet was also not in the vehicle. In another strange twist, his work laptop, which he often carried around even on his days off, was nowhere to be seen either. Multiple people later reported seeing a man resembling Ray Gricar in Lewisburg on the day he vanished. Witnesses recalled Gricar browsing in the Street of Shops antique mall and strolling down Market Street in the early afternoon. One shop owner even claimed that Gricar had visited the mall, accompanied by an unknown dark-haired woman, appearing as if he was waiting for someone. This lead was never confirmed, and police found no evidence that Gricar was having an affair or meeting a secret contact. Aside from these anecdotal sightings, nothing seemed amiss in Lewisburg that day. It was as if the district attorney simply vanished into thin air, a sentiment Patty Fornicola, his girlfriend, would later echo throughout interviews. In the immediate aftermath of Gricar's disappearance, a massive investigation unfolded. Local law enforcement, joined by Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI, combed the area for clues. Search teams with canine units scoured the riverbanks and wooded areas, while dive teams plunged into the Susquehanna River, looking for any sign of the missing DA. Helicopters buzzed overhead to survey the surrounding countryside from above. Despite these exhaustive efforts, the searches in those first days turned up nothing. No trace of Gricar himself. Investigators were left with only the abandoned car and a handful of perplexing hints. Over the next few weeks, tips poured in from the public, and sightings were reported across multiple states. There was an unconfirmed sighting of a man matching Grieker's description in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, on April 18th, just a few days after he went missing. Still, other reports from as far away as Texas and Illinois came in over the months that followed. One tipster even claimed to have seen Grieker in the audience of a taping of the Oprah Winfrey Show in Chicago. However, none of these leads could be substantiated. Police tracked down many of the sightings, only to determine that the individuals spotted were not Ray Grieker, or that the accounts were not credible. By early summer 2005, the case had grown cold, with Grieker's fate still completely unknown. As the investigation pressed on, a major break, or perhaps another mystery, emerged in July 2005. On July 30th of that year, over 3 months after Ray Grieker disappeared, 2 fishermen on the Susquehanna River made a startling discovery. They found a laptop computer submerged in the shallow water beneath a bridge outside Lewisburg. It was soon identified as Grieker's missing county-issued laptop. The device was found lodged against a bridge support under a highway bridge that spans the river between Lewisburg and the neighboring town of Milton. Notably, when divers retrieved the mud-caked laptop, its hard drive was missing. That is to say, the drive had been physically removed from the machine. Investigators scoured the area for the missing hard disk, and a few months later, a broken computer hard drive was recovered on the riverbank downstream. The hard drive proved to be the one belonging to Grieker's laptop. Unfortunately, it was badly damaged by water and silt, and forensic analysts were unable to recover any data from it. The fact that the hard drive was separated from the laptop, and apparently intentionally removed, raised many additional questions. It suggested that someone, perhaps Ray himself or an unknown party, had taken steps to destroy the computer and any information it contained before tossing it into the river. The discovery of the laptop spurred investigators to dig deeper into Ray's digital footprint. A search of the home computer at Ray's residence revealed troubling evidence that someone had researched how to destroy computer data. In the days or weeks prior to his disappearance, internet searches had been made for phrases like "how to wreck a hard drive" and "water damage to a notebook computer." In addition, records later indicated that Ray had purchased specialized data wiping software, presumably to overwrite the computer's hard drive contents. It appeared that either Ray or someone using his computer anticipated the need to damage or dispose of a hard drive. This revelation only deepened the mystery. Was Ray preparing to permanently erase sensitive information? And if so, what information and why? Or had an unknown perpetrator gained access to his home and done all this to cover their tracks? With the laptop and hard drive recovered, albeit yielding no readable data, physical evidence in the case essentially stalled. No other belongings of Grieker were ever found in the river. Notably, his wallet and car keys remained missing. Despite the lack of solid forensic evidence, investigators continued to pursue the case. But by 2006, however, leads were dwindling, and years passed with no sign of Ray. In July 2011, after 6 years with no answers, Centre County authorities took the step of declaring Ray legally deceased. This legal declaration provided closure on paper for estate and administrative purposes, but it didn't reflect an actual resolution of the investigation. Ray's body had not been found, and the case was far from closed in the eyes of law enforcement. The Pennsylvania State Police and other agencies have repeatedly affirmed that the case remains open and active. From the outset, the disappearance of Ray presented investigators with an unsettling question. What happened to a well-respected prosecutor in broad daylight, in a quiet Pennsylvania town? Over the years, several key theories have emerged, each examined by authorities. All are rooted in the peculiar evidence, or lack thereof, left behind. While speculation has run rampant in forums and media, investigators have tried to ground their conclusions in facts. One of the initial lines of inquiry was that Griecar might have chosen to leave the world on a voluntary basis. This theory arose in part because of an eerie family coincidence. In May 1996, Ray's older brother, Roy Griecar, disappeared in Ohio under similar circumstances. Roy told his wife he was going out to run an errand and never returned. A week later, Roy's body was found in the Great Miami River. It was ruled that he did it himself by jumping into the river. Given that parallel, it was reasonable for police to ask if Ray Griecar could have followed the same tragic path. Investigators did consider whether depression or personal pressures might have driven Ray to end his life in the Susquehanna River, which flows not far from where his car was found. However, they found no solid evidence that Griecar was suffering from mental health issues at the time. Friends and family described him as upbeat and excited about his upcoming retirement and future plans. In fact, Griecar and Patty Fornicola had been actively planning a cross-country road trip to celebrate his retirement. They even had specific plans to visit national parks and then spend time with Griecar's adult daughter in Washington state. Moreover, despite extensive searches, no body was ever recovered from the river or elsewhere. Police noted that if Griecar had jumped into the water, one might expect some trace, clothing, shoes, or ultimately a body, to turn up, but nothing ever did. To this day, there is no direct evidence that Ray Griecar perished this way, and authorities have not classified his case as such. Another theory claims that Ray chose to deliberately walk away and start a new life. Cases of high-profile individuals vanishing intentionally are rare but not unheard of. Some cite examples of officials or businessmen who faked their deaths to escape problems. In Ray's case, some have wondered if he might have been motivated to leave behind his identity due to undisclosed troubles or fears. Could he have staged the scene in Lewisburg, abandoning his car and destroying his laptop, to mislead investigators and then quietly slipped away? Investigators didn't dismiss this idea outright, especially given the evidence of the computer being wiped, an action that could fit with someone covering their tracks. They explored whether Ray had made any secret preparations for a getaway. The FBI assisted by examining Ray's financial records, looking for any signs of unusual transactions, hidden funds, or a stash of money that could finance a life on the run. However, despite the FBI's far-reaching investigative powers, they found nothing. There was no evidence that Griecar moved large sums of money or set up any secret accounts, and his bank accounts and credit cards saw no activity after April 2005. His passport was left at home, and there were no obvious withdrawals of cash prior to his disappearance. Taking on a completely new identity would also have required significant planning. By all accounts, Ray had not expressed a desire to leave, nor did he exhibit behavior consistent with someone preparing to vanish. Further, this would have meant giving up the significant pension from the job he was just about to retire from. Despite the lack of evidence, the authorities have never been able to specifically rule this out. The third, and perhaps most troubling theory, is that Ray Griecar met with foul play. If true, this would likely mean someone abducted or attacked him on April 15th and disposed of his body, making it look as if he simply walked away. There are several sub-theories within this category, all of which have been investigated by the authorities. One possibility is that Ray was the victim of a crime of opportunity or an encounter that turned violent. Perhaps he met a stranger, or even the unidentified woman some witnesses noted, in Lewisburg, and things took a deadly turn. The presence of cigarette ash in his car raised the question of whether someone else was in the vehicle with him that day. Could Ray have given a ride to a stranger, or met someone who then overpowered him? However, the car itself showed no signs of struggle, making an attack in the vehicle less likely. If an altercation happened elsewhere, no witnesses reported any disturbance. The lack of any obvious motive for a random person to target a small-town DA in broad daylight has kept this line of thought speculative. Given Ray's role as a prosecutor, investigators naturally examined whether someone he had put behind bars sought revenge. During his 20-year career as DA, Griecar handled many serious cases and likely angered more than a few dangerous individuals. Early in the investigation, police ran through Ray's recent case list to see if any defendants or convicts had made threats or stood out as suspicious. They also looked at older cases that might connect. One notable angle was Griecar's involvement in prosecuting members of a motorcycle gang. In 2003, he had overseen a case against a Hells Angels smuggling ring, which led some to wonder if gang members might have sought retaliation. However, investigators consider this theory highly unlikely, given that organized crime tends to view prosecutors themselves as simple cogs in a machine. A widely discussed theory in the public realm centers on Ray's decision in 1998 not to prosecute Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky. If you're fortunate enough to be unfamiliar with Jerry Sandusky, let's just say he is the worst sort of human being imaginable and won't see the light of day for the rest of his life. In 1998, Ray had reviewed a complaint against Sandusky, but declined to press charges. After Sandusky's crimes came to light, the coincidence that Ray had vanished in 2005 led to rampant speculation. Some theorists claimed that Ray might have been silenced by individuals who wanted to cover up the scandal, or conversely that an ashamed Ray might have disappeared due to regret. Still another theory suggests that perhaps a parent sought revenge for Ray's refusal to prosecute Sandusky. However, law enforcement agencies directly involved in Ray's case have consistently found no evidence linking his disappearance to the Sandusky matter. In absence of any real evidence, the Sandusky theory remains entirely in the realm of conjecture. Based on the evidence as it stands, it seems to me that the theory that he orchestrated his own demise is the most likely to be true. The fact that he disappeared under circumstances that were eerily similar to that of his brother is one point in favor of this. Further, the internet searches on how to destroy evidence were presumptively his searches until proven otherwise. While I will admit that someone could have broken in and placed these searches on his computer prior to his disappearance, there was no evidence of a break-in whatsoever. I'd also like to add that if this was part of a broader conspiracy, I suspect someone who broke in would have placed much more direct search queries, if you catch my drift. Further, I suspect that Ray Griecar, being a prosecutor, would be more attuned to operational security than the average person. I also find the fact that he was about to retire potentially a significant point in favor of this theory. Ray Griecar was a man who was known to take his work laptop with him on his off days. He had a job that many people strive for and dream about, and this was all coming to an end. It's possible that this caused him more mental anguish than he let on to his friends and family members. And of course, it's necessary to say that just because someone appears happy to their friends and family doesn't necessarily mean much. After all, nobody knows exactly what a person is feeling inside their own head. On the morning of October 29, 2004, a shocking scene unfolded at Wembley Point, a 21-story triangular office tower in northwest London. Office workers arriving for the day watched in horror as a young woman in the top-floor cafeteria suddenly climbed onto a table, opened a window, and leapt out. Her body was recovered shortly after 9 a.m. from the shallow River Brent at the base of the tower. Police quickly determined that the woman had fallen from the 21st floor and that her death was voluntary, with no immediate evidence of foul play. Yet in the aftermath, one perplexing fact would haunt investigators. Nobody knew who this well-dressed tragic jumper was. The unidentified woman appeared to be between 20 and 40 years old, of either African or Afro-Caribbean descent, and stood around 5'3". Witnesses described her as petite and well-groomed, wearing layers of neat clothing on that brisk autumn morning. She wore a maroon zip-up bomber jacket over a crew-neck sweater and a thin black turtleneck, along with black pants, tights, and a pair of black Skechers shoes. On her fingers she had two distinctive rings, one shaped like a cowrie shell, and a simple silver watch on her wrist. Investigators found no identification on the woman's body. No wallet, no phone, no cards or keys. This absence of ID, combined with the traumatic manner of death, posed an immediate challenge. Metropolitan police officers treated the case as a non-suspicious death, which unfortunately meant fewer resources were devoted to uncovering her identity. Officers recorded the basics, documenting the woman's description, her fingerprints and DNA, in hopes she would perhaps be easy to identify. Early on, they also checked missing persons reports for anyone of her description. But in 2004, with limited DNA technology and no immediate matches in police databases, those efforts yielded nothing conclusive. With no obvious signs of a crime, the investigation stalled quickly. The mystery woman's few possessions provided tantalizing clues, but also deepened the puzzle. On the table in the 21st floor cafe where she had sat, she left an assortment of items, some usual, but one highly unusual. Those items were 5 pounds in cash, an empty 10-pack of Marlboros, a black plastic bag, a Guardian newspaper, and most strikingly, a 2-foot by 1-foot oil painting. If you're just listening, I put the painting up on the screen now, and it looks a bit unusual and even slightly creepy to my eyes. That said, I'm not sure if that's because I knew the context of when and where it was found prior to seeing it, but I'll come back to this painting in a moment. Not a single item on the table bore her name or any personal detail. The 7-day bus pass found among her things proved to be one of the most significant pieces of evidence. It had been issued just 3 days earlier, on Tuesday, October 26, 2004, at 7:07 a.m., from a ticket vendor on Seven Sisters Road in North London. This suggested she had traveled roughly 10 miles across the city, heading from the Seven Sisters area to Wembley, possibly as part of a regular route she took. The pass still had 2 days remaining on it, potentially implying she originally intended to continue using it through the end of that week. The oil painting left at her cafe table was perhaps the strangest clue of all. Described as a mostly abstract scene with bold, tribal-style patterns, the artwork depicts what look like dancing or falling figures and a large, blank, white, faceless shape in the center. Hauntingly, it's as if the painting itself symbolizes an unknown identity. Police circulated images of the distinctive painting, hoping someone might recognize it. Some speculated it was created by the woman herself or came from a local artist, but its origin remains unknown. The presence of the painting led to much speculation. Why would someone intent on ending herself carry a canvas with her to an office tower? One theory was that Wembley Point occasionally hosted art exhibitions, so maybe she was an artist familiar with the venue. This possibility, while unconfirmed, could explain how she knew there was a cafe on the top floor open to the public. Indeed, co-workers in the building noted that the 21st floor restaurant wasn't widely advertised outside, yet the woman found her way there with apparent ease. Witness accounts from that morning added a few more details about the woman's final moments. 2 people who rode the elevator with her up to the 21st floor recalled that she looked intensely distressed. One even tried to lighten the mood by saying something like, "Cheer up, love. It might never happen," as they ascended. But the woman remained silent and miserable. In the cafe, she bought a coffee and smoked a cigarette quietly by a window, leafing through that day's Guardian newspaper. Nothing about her behavior overtly drew alarm until the very moment she jumped. The suddenness of her act left bystanders in shock. One cafe patron, only feet away, later described seeing the window left ajar and the woman simply gone in an instant. Those who witnessed the tragedy did not recognize the woman as a colleague or friend. In the hours and days following the death, no immediate leads emerged. No missing person report matching her description was filed, either before or after October 29, 2004. This led people to start asking hard questions about what had happened. How could a woman seemingly in her 20s or 30s, with a job, as implied by her attire and bus pass, and presumably acquaintances, vanish from life without anyone reporting her missing? The lack of an ID and the absence of obvious family or friends coming forward meant the case quickly went cold. After a coroner's inquest confirmed the cause of death as self-inflicted by jumping, the unknown woman was eventually laid to rest with only a number marking her grave. For over a decade, the Wembley Point woman case saw little public progress. However, the mystery was never completely forgotten. Occasional media stories appeared about unidentified people, and this young woman's death in a busy London office tower stood out as particularly baffling. Around 2018, a team of volunteer investigators and a charity called Locate International took a special interest in the case. These volunteers, including former police, researchers, and concerned citizens, began re-examining the evidence with fresh eyes. They combed through records, scoured the internet for any mention of a missing person fitting the woman's profile, and even tracked down former Wembley Point workers to interview. More significant developments finally began to emerge in the early 2020s. In July 2021, an appeal was launched, focusing on the mysterious oil painting. Locate International and police publicized the painting's image to art communities, hoping an artist or gallery might recognize its style. Then in October 2022, around the 18th anniversary of the death, London media picked up the story once again. A new lifelike composite image of the Wembley Point woman was released to the public, showing a young black woman with short dark hair and a calm expression. In late 2024, 2 decades after the woman's death, investigators revealed new information that had surfaced, accompanied by another public appeal. According to Locate International, a witness came forward to report a crucial conversation. This man claimed that about 2 weeks before the incident, he had met a woman matching the Wembley Point woman's description near the office building and chatted with her. She appeared deeply upset and confided that she was distraught over her boyfriend's health problems, implying she was caring for a partner who was seriously ill. If true, it indicates the woman had a personal relationship and perhaps a caregiver role, suggesting there may be a boyfriend, or his family, out there who knew her. Authorities have appealed for that unknown boyfriend, or anyone who might recall a friend's ill partner around 2004, to step forward. Another line of speculation focuses on the woman's background and community ties. Public tips have repeatedly suggested she might have been connected to community or arts centers around the Seven Sisters neighborhood. One tip mentioned the Chestnuts Community Center, which in the early 2000s hosted programs for West African immigrants and asylum seekers. The idea, which remains unverified, is that she could have been an asylum seeker from West Africa who had relatively few contacts in London. This theory might also account for why loved ones abroad wouldn't know where to begin looking if she went missing in the UK. Similarly, the cowrie shell ring she wore is a style often associated with femininity and fertility in some African cultures. This has led to speculation that she may have faced personal challenges, like a longing for children, or that she may have lost a child. At the end of the day, though, everything with this unknown woman remains almost entirely speculative. Given the distinct painting she was found with, I suspect the best chance of identifying her is if someone comes forward who recognizes the painting. This may be the one break in the case required for all the other evidence to fall into place and for the case to be solved. Alternatively, there's also the possibility of familial DNA technology being used to connect her to her relatives. However, if she was a West African asylum seeker with no family in the UK, this vastly reduces the chances of this being an effective investigative method at present. In the hills of Appalachia lurks a mystery older than the United States itself, an enigmatic group known as the Moon-Eyed People. According to Cherokee folklore, these peculiar beings inhabited the Appalachian Mountains long before Europeans set foot on the continent. They've been described as pale-skinned nocturnal humans who live underground and who have eyes so sensitive they couldn't bear daylight. But who were they really? Theories vary from ancient Welsh explorers, a forgotten indigenous civilization, to more esoteric claims. The legend of the Moon-Eyed People first emerged through Cherokee oral tradition and reached early settler ears by the 18th century. One of the earliest written accounts dates to 1797, when Benjamin Smith Barton, a scientist, attempted to document these oral traditions. He reported an unusual Cherokee story describing a strange people already living in the area when they arrived. These moon-eyed inhabitants, unable to see clearly by day, were eventually driven away by the Cherokee, who claimed their land. Another striking account came from Cherokee Chief Oconostota, documented by Tennessee's first governor, John Sevier, in 1782. Now, notably, I should mention that John Sevier generally had hostile relations with the Cherokee and led troops in numerous battles against Cherokee forces. That is to say, he may have been an unreliable narrator, and he may have had alternative reasons for attributing the following to this Cherokee chief. Oconostota vividly described mysterious quote-unquote white people who crossed the ocean long before Europeans officially arrived, leaving behind impressive stone structures. According to this narrative, the Cherokee strategically ambushed the Moon-Eyed People during a bright full moon when they couldn't properly see, and eliminated them. Modern theorists have suggested that this early recording of this oral tradition may have been twisted to suit the needs of those who wished to conquer the Cherokee and take their land. Evidence for this is circumstantial. However, it portrays the Cherokee as people who conquered the land from people who sound like they could conceivably be European descendants. Accordingly, this may have been used to shore up the idea that the land wasn't rightfully property of the Cherokee. This effectively reframes the narrative of conquest into the much more palatable idea of a reconquest of rightful lands. Over centuries, speculation about the Moon-Eyed People's identity has inspired a variety of theories. The most interesting theory points to medieval Welsh explorers led by Prince Madoc, who allegedly sailed to America around 1170, centuries before Columbus. Legends persist of blue-eyed Native Americans speaking an unintelligible tongue, fueling claims that the Moon-Eyed People were descendants of these lost colonists. At Georgia's Fort Mountain State Park, a plaque proudly attributes an ancient stone wall to Madoc's followers. To some, this has cemented the Welsh narrative, despite the lack of solid archaeological evidence. Others have speculated they're the descendants of Norse colonists from Vinland or Greenland. Despite the Norse actually having been in America prior to Columbus, this theory hasn't attracted much attention. A more historically grounded theory suggests the Moon-Eyed People were remnants of earlier indigenous cultures, such as the Adena or Hopewell mound builders. Cherokee stories might reflect real memories of encountering ancient civilizations that had previously inhabited Appalachia, constructing mounds and stone forts. Over generations, these encounters evolved into mythic tales of fair-skinned predecessors. Some have speculated that this element, where the moon-eyed people are described as looking vaguely European, developed after their arrival on the continent. Interestingly, according to this theory, the Cherokee may have heard about Europeans long prior to actually meeting any, and worked their appearance into a pre-existing myth. Another theory is that the Cherokee references to moon-eyed people described early European miners, quote-unquote, living underground and emerging primarily at night. And when you think about it for a moment, it actually makes a lot of sense. Seeing hunched-over people with unfamiliar hair, eye and skin colors emerging from the ground at dusk may have been the genesis of this legend. These individuals would have also needed some time to adjust to normal light after a day down in the mine, contributing to the idea that their eyes couldn't handle natural light.